Previously on River Heights Mysteries.
The Sterling Gallery requests the honor of your presence for a private viewing of Midnight Over Manhattan by Julian Vane.
Thank you for coming.
Chapter 4: The Nights of the Gala. The silence that followed the return of the lights was heavier than the darkness itself. In the high-altitude sanctuary of the Sterling Gallery, the elite of New York's art world stood frozen, their champagne glasses reflecting the jagged, empty remnants of the gilded frame. Arthur Sterling slumped against the wall, his face a ghostly shade of gray. "It's gone. The masterpiece. The entire season is ruined." Nancy Drew was the first to move. While the other guests began to murmur and surge toward the exits in a wave of panicked silk and wool, Nancy stepped closer to the empty frame. Her keen eyes scanned the floor. "Don't let anyone leave," she called out, her voice ringing with an authority that stopped the crowd in its tracks. The lights were only out for a few seconds. The thief must still be in the room. A man in a sharp tuxedo, his hair slicked back with heavy pomade, stepped forward. "And who are you to tell us what to do? This is New York, girl, not some schoolyard." "This is Nancy Drew," Bess Marvin interrupted, her chin tilted defiantly. "And if I were you, I'd listen to her." Miss Marple, meanwhile, had not moved toward the empty frame. Instead, she had retreated to a small velvet settee near the refreshment table, her knitting needles already clicking rhythmically as if she were in the peace of her own parlor. Her eyes, however, were far from peaceful. They were darting across the room, observing the reactions of the guests with the precision of a hawk. "It's very much like the incident with the missing church hymnals back in '28, Jane Marple remarked softly as Nancy approached her. Everyone looked at the choir, but the real culprit was the one who was looking at the ceiling. Human nature, Nancy, is so very predictable when it is startled." Nancy knelt by the base of the frame. "Look at this, Miss Marple." She pointed to a tiny, almost invisible smudge on the white velvet of the ripped curtain. It was a faint, oily streak of crimson. The painting was of a night scene, mostly blues and blacks. Where would red paints come from? "Perhaps not paint at all, dear," Jane suggested, tilting her head. "Perhaps a very specific shade of lipstick, or perhaps the residue from a very specific wax seal." Before Nancy could investigate further, the gallery doors burst open, and a squad of NYPD officers in their heavy blue coats marched in. At their head was a stout, red-faced detective who looked like he had been interrupted in the middle of a very good steak dinner. "Detective Murphy," Arthur Sterling gasped, rushing toward him. "My painting, the Julian Vane, it's been stolen right from under our noses." Murphy surveyed the room with a cynical eye. "All right, nobody moves. We'll take statements from everyone. And you," he pointed at Nancy, "I don't need any girl detectives tripping over my crime scene. I've heard of you, Drew. Stay behind the line." Nancy caught Miss Marple's eye. The elderly woman gave a near imperceptible nod toward the nervous lead artist, Julian Vane, who was standing in the corner, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He wasn't looking at the empty frame with the despair of a creator. He was looking at the heavy service elevator at the back of the room. "The police will look for a professional thief," Miss Marple whispered, as a detective began to usher guests toward the elevators. "But they forget that sometimes the most obvious exit isn't the front door, and the person most upset about a theft isn't always the one who lost the item." Nancy watched Julian Vane slip through a side door marked "Private." "I think it's time we did some sightseeing that isn't on the official tour, Miss Marple." "Indeed, Nancy, but do be careful. Manhattan is much larger than St. Mary Mead, and the shadows here are considerably deeper."